It wouldn't be me, and you'll learn this very quickly about me if you're joining us on a regular basis. I will find a way to sneak in a baseball segment anywhere that I can. And on a football Monday, it's hard to do so, but we will do so here because I think there is an interesting conversation to be had about this Diamondbacks team in relation to the teams that are still left. We were down to the Final Four in Major League Baseball. Game 2 of the Mets and Dodgers gets underway here in just about 40 minutes from now when we're done here on the air. And then Game 1 of Guardians and Yankees gets underway a little bit later on tonight. I believe that is a 7 o'clock Eastern time start, so 4:08 for us here on the West Coast. And by the way, Producer Dylan, you can just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down to all of these statements. I don't think Diamondbacks fans rooting for the Dodgers, right? They're not rooting for the Dodgers. That would be a thumbs down. Yeah, definitely not rooting for the Dodgers. Well, they're not rooting for the Mets because in some way, the Mets are the reason why the Diamondbacks aren't in the playoffs. Now, I know the Diamondbacks' underperformance in the end of August and through September is the large reason why they aren't participating in September, but they had an opportunity. If the Mets would have won the second game of that doubleheader, it would have knocked out the Braves and it would have allowed the Diamondbacks to be in. So I don't think there's this great fanfare for the Mets to go to the World Series. So I don't know if they're rooting for anybody on the American or on the National League side of things. And on the American League side of things, definitely not rooting for the Yankees because nobody roots for the Yankees unless you're a Yankees fan. And then that leaves the Guardians as the only team that you probably could be rooting for. And what I find so interesting about that is not only is that the team that most Diamondbacks fans, if you had to pick a team to be rooting for, it's also the team that you have the most in common with. Because there's nothing that the Diamondbacks can take away from the Dodgers, the Mets, or the Yankees. There's nothing in the way that those three organizations are run, the way those three organizations are set up. You can't compare yourself to those three teams. Maybe you can take some institutional knowledge of the way they attack player development and the things that they look for in their analytics department, but you don't have the resources that those three franchises have. Those three teams are the top three teams in terms of tax payroll this year. So 1, 2, and 3 are the Mets, Dodgers, and Yankees in that order. All three of those teams, in terms of the luxury tax payroll, spending over $300 million. And they're the only three teams that are over $300 million. So there's nothing that you can take from them because even if you wanted to take the institutional knowledge of how they scout or how they run their player development, what analytic models they are looking at, the way they scout internationally, all of those things, the reason why those franchises can be so good at those parts of running a baseball organization, and specifically the Dodgers, is because not only do they have the best, but they're spending the most money. It's not just about the payroll that you're spending on your players and your coaching staff. It goes beyond that. I mean, the New York Mets, a team that is in the NLCS, has spent a ton of money, probably hundreds of millions of dollars, developing a pitching lab down in Florida to help them work on pitching development. Sure, could the Diamondbacks set up the same equipment and hire similar coaches? Yes. But the Mets have a resource in Steve Cohen that will spend money. So yes, you can just look at payroll and see the disparity there, but there's also a disparity in the outside of payroll operation spending that these three teams do. The Dodgers to an elite level, which is why they've had the sustained success that they've had. So that gets us back to the Guardians, the one team that you can realistically compare yourself with. The Guardians 21st in tax payroll this year with $140 million. Now, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, if you're listening to the show, you're watching us on the YouTube side of things. Do you know where the Diamondbacks were this year in terms of tax payroll? $219 million. You didn't think that number started with a 2, did you? You thought it was going to be similar to the Guardians. So the Diamondbacks, in terms of tax payroll, spent $69 million more, or $79 million more. It's tough to do math, do live radio at the same time, than the Guardians did. So small market, yes, you can unite on that front, but you spent almost $80 million more on your team this year than they did. But let's, for just a moment, take a look at how the Guardians are built and why this should be the model. And it's why I think it is the model. And Mike Hazen's an incredibly smart GM. And let me get in front of this. This is the first time you're hearing me in this marketplace talk about Mike Hazen. You're going to learn very quickly. I think Mike Hazen is the best general manager in this town. I think Mike Hazen is on another level when it comes to running an organization. I think he's better than Monty Ossenfort. I think he's better than James Jones. I think he is the standard bearer of how to run a sports franchise in Arizona. I think he is an elite level executive. And I think the moves that he makes time and time again pay off. And so he's a guy that is looking at the way other teams are doing things. And the Guardians, I think, are a great example. Let's compare the two. The Guardians have one major superstar on their team that is underappreciated, that being Jose Ramirez. Does that sound familiar? The Arizona Diamondbacks having a superstar player that is underappreciated? Ketel Marte, anybody? Probably should always be in the MVP conversation every single year, but isn't, because they play in a small market, or the team doesn't, win 95 plus games, so they're just not permeating the national noise. So we've got that comparison between the two teams. The Guardians, an elite level bullpen, spearheaded Emmanuel Clase, Hunter Gaddis, and Cade Smith have also been good this year. And you can clearly see that that's what Mike Hazen is trying to set up for the future. Justin Martinez is going to be the closer of this team moving forward. A young arm, 100+ mile per hour stuff. And then AJ Puck is going to be one of your elite level setup men. So the Diamondbacks, in a lot of ways, are emulating, and not to say that they're copying, but these two teams have a lot of stuff in common. These two teams are built very similarly. Take your fan cap off for a moment. If you looked at the roster for the Arizona Diamondbacks, there are not a lot of household names that people would know. And you look up and down the Guardians roster, outside of Jose Ramirez, there are not a lot of household names. You're built with young, arbitration-eligible players, so you keep the cost down, and you supplant that with a couple of big fish that you spend a lot of money on. That's the way the Guardians are doing it this year, and it's the way the Diamondbacks have been doing it recently, up until this year, where they spent the most money that they've ever spent since Ken Kendrick bought the team. And he sure let you know about it with that Jordan Montgomery contract. That was all him. He's the one that greenlit that money. And so, to answer the question that I teased, is there anything the Diamondbacks can take away from the four teams still standing? Sure. Would we all love to have the purse strings that the Mets and Yankees and Dodgers have, to be able to consider any trade, to be able to consider any free agent? Absolutely. And I don't want to say it's easy, because these decisions are still tough, and you have to make sure that you pick the right player to allocate your money to. But it is easy to make the decision to want to sign Shohei Ohtani, and Shohei Ohtani wanting to come to your baseball team and just giving him all the money in the world. That's an easy thing to do. Diamondbacks don't have that luxury. They have to make sure that their moves, because they are only able to make a few big splashes, are impactful. And that's where there's only one team still standing that they can compare to. And it's the Guardians. They could have compared a little bit to the Royals if the Royals would have gone on. The Tigers as well. They're similar to those teams. But there's nothing. I mean, look at the National League playoff picture as a whole. Are they similar to the Phillies? No. Are they similar to the Padres? No. Padres are spending a ton of money. Even though they cut costs and traded Juan Soto, they still have a high payroll. You want to talk about the Brewers? Small market team, limited ability in terms of resources to improve their team, still won 93 games. Yeah, that's the model. Milwaukee, Cleveland, Kansas City. That's the water that Arizona should be trying to copy. That's the playbook that the Diamondbacks have to emulate. And they're, I think, setting their own course, their own playbook that other teams are trying to emulate. And so, that's the unfortunate thing for if you're not a fan of one of these four teams. If you're not watching this from a fan perspective, are you enjoying watching the Dodgers and the Mets and their combined payrolls being over $600 million? Are you enjoying that as a small market team? Are you enjoying that as a fan of the Brewers or the Diamondbacks or the Cincinnati Reds? Or are you enjoying that? You're not. And it's unfortunate, but that's where baseball is right now. Now, Phillies fans, they're out and they're probably thinking to themselves, okay, we'll just have to spend more, and we can spend more because we have an owner that will allow us to spend more. And there are other teams that can't do that. And so sports are copycat leagues, right? One team does something successfully and everybody tries to copy it. It's what the A's did with Moneyball. And then everybody tried to institute their version of Moneyball, their version of advanced analytics. And then you have these great teams, these teams that have fantastic payrolls, also adding that stuff in. And then they're becoming just machines. They're becoming institutions in how they are doing things. And that's where the Diamondbacks are trying to be, but just doing it on a smaller scale. Or I shouldn't say a smaller scale, but with a risk profile that is different. Their investments have to be different. They can't have the stock portfolio that's full of risky bets. They can't take a chance and give a big time contract to a pitcher that has underperformed and has had an injury history. They can't give out those types of dollars to those players to try to get them to come to Arizona. They can't do it because if it fails, if those players continue to be hurt or continue to underperform, they can't get out from underneath those contracts. The Madison Bumgarner contract, the perfect example. The Zach Greinke contract, a perfect example. You can't get yourself out from underneath those contracts. And so if there's a team that you want to watch in this postseason that you want to root for, because it is a model that is very similar to the one that's here, it's the Cleveland Guardians. The way they are built is extremely similar